Coming out of the closet, often shortened to coming out, is a metaphor used to describe LGBT people's self-disclosure of their sexual orientation or of their gender identity, framed and debated as a privacy issue. Coming out of the closet is experienced variously as a psychological process or journey, decision-making or risk-taking, a strategy or plan, a mass or public event, a speech act and a matter of personal identity, a rite of passage, liberation or emancipation from oppression, an ordeal, a means toward feeling gay pride instead of shame and social stigma, or even career suicide. Author Steven Seidman writes that, it is the power of the closet to shape the core of an individual's life that has made homosexuality into a significant personal, social, and political drama in 20th century America. Coming out of the closet is the source of other gay slang expressions related to voluntary disclosure or lack thereof. LGBT people who have already revealed or no longer conceal their sexual orientation or gender identity are out, i.e. openly LGBT. Oppositely, LGBT people who have yet to come out or have opted not to do so are labeled as closeted or being in the closet. Outing is the deliberate or accidental disclosure of an LGBT person's sexual orientation or gender identity, without their consent. By extension, outing oneself is self-disclosure. Glass closet means the open secret of when public figures being LGBT is considered a widely accepted fact even though they have not officially come out. In 1869, 100 years before the Stonewall riots, the German homosexual rights advocate Karl Heinrich Ulrichs introduced the idea of self-disclosure as a means of emancipation, claiming that invisibility was a major obstacle toward changing public opinion. He urged homosexual people to reveal their same-sex attractions. In an interview, Robert Beachy said, "I think it is reasonable to describe as the first gay person to publicly out himself." In his 1906 work, Das sexuelle Leben unserer Zeit in seine Beziehungen zur modernen Kultur, Ivan Bloch, a German Jewish physician, entreated elderly homosexuals to self-disclose to their family members and acquaintances. In 1914, Magnus Hirschfeld revisited the topic in his major work The Homosexuality of Men and Women, discussing the social and legal potentials of several thousand homosexual men and women of rank, revealing their sexual orientation to the police in order to influence legislators and public opinion. The first prominent American to reveal his homosexuality was the poet Robert Duncan. In 1944, using his own name in the anarchist magazine Politics, he wrote that homosexuals were an oppressed minority. The decidedly clandestine Mattachine Society, founded by Harry Hay and other veterans of the Wallace for President campaign in Los Angeles in 1950, moved into the public eye after Hal Cole took over the group in San Francisco in 1953. With many gays emerging from the closet. In 1951, Donald Webster Corey published his landmark The Homosexual in America, exclaiming, "Society has handed me a mask to wear everywhere I go, at all times and before all sections of society. I pretend." Corey was a pseudonym, but his frank and openly subjective descriptions served as a stimulus to the emerging homosexual self-awareness in the nascent homophile movement. In the 1960s, Frank Kameny came to the forefront of the struggle. Having been fired from his job as an astronomer for the Army Map Service in 1957 for homosexual behavior, Kameny refused to go quietly. He openly fought his dismissal, eventually appealing it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. As a vocal leader of the growing movement, Kameny argued for unapologetic public actions. The cornerstone of his conviction was that we must instill in the homosexual community a sense of worth to the individual homosexual, which could only be achieved through campaigns openly led by homosexuals themselves. With the spread of consciousness raising in the late 1960s, coming out became a key strategy of the gay liberation movement to raise political consciousness to counter heterosexism and homophobia. At the same time and continuing into the 1980s, gay and lesbian social support discussion groups, some of which were called coming out groups, focused on sharing coming out stories, with the goal of reducing isolation and increasing LGBT visibility and pride. The present-day expression, coming out, is understood to have originated in the early 20th century. From an analogy that likens homosexuals' introduction into gay subculture to a debutante's coming out party. This is a celebration for a young upper-class woman who is making her debut, her formal presentation to society, because she has reached adult age or has become eligible for marriage. As historian George Chauncey points out, gay people in the pre-war years did not speak of coming out of what we call the gay closet but rather of coming out into what they called H.